My brother stole my inheritance and laughed. You're just a failure. Dad knew you'd blow it all anyway. I stayed silent. But when his life started falling apart, my phone exploded with 27 missed calls. I'd always been the black sheep of the family. While my older brother, Ethan, was the golden child, star athlete, straight-A student, Dad's favorite, I was the quiet one, the dreamer. I spent my childhood buried in books, sketching designs for inventions that never came to life, while Ethan was out winning trophies and earning Dad's praise. When Dad passed away last year, I thought maybe things would change. Maybe, just maybe, he'd left something for me in his will. A small acknowledgement, a sign that he'd seen me, really seen me, even just once. I was wrong. The reading of the will was a disaster. Ethan sat there, smug as ever, his tailored suit and polished shoes a stark contrast to my worn jeans and scuffed sneakers. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading. To my son, Ethan, I leave the family business, the house, and the majority of my estate. To my son, Mark, $10,000. I stared at the lawyer, my heart sinking. That's it. Ethan laughed, a cold, mocking sound that echoed in the sterile office. Come on, Mark. You're just a failure. Dad knew you'd blow it all anyway. This is probably more than you deserve. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just took the check, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my pocket. Then I walked out, the sound of Ethan's laughter ringing in my ears. But as I drove home, my mind was racing. If Ethan thought he could take everything from me, he had no idea who he was dealing with. The next few months were a blur. Ethan flaunted his newfound wealth, posting photos of his luxury vacations, his new cars, his amazing life. He even bought a yacht, naming it Legacy, a not-so-subtle jab at me. Meanwhile, I was struggling to make ends meet. I'd always dreamed of starting my own business, a small cafe where people could gather, relax, and feel at home. It was a simple dream, but it was mine. I'd even found the perfect location, a cozy little space downtown with big windows and a warm, inviting atmosphere. But without the inheritance, that dream seemed impossible. I tried to talk to Ethan, to reason with him. You don't need all of it, Ethan. Just a little help, that's all I'm asking. I'm not asking for the house or the business, just enough to get started. He laughed in my face. You're pathetic, Mark. Dad was right about you. You just wasted on some stupid idea and end up broke anyway. I didn't respond. I just walked away, my fists clenched so tight my nails left crescent-shaped marks in my palms. But the worst part? The way he treated Mom. After Dad's death, Mom had moved into a small apartment, struggling to make ends meet on her pension. Ethan had promised to help her, but he never did. She's fine, he'd say, brushing me off. Stop being so dramatic. She's got her pension, doesn't she? I tried to help her myself, but with my meager savings, it was almost impossible. I'd visit her every weekend, bringing groceries and trying to fix things around her apartment. She never complained, but I could see the strain in her eyes. One evening, as we sat at her tiny kitchen table, she reached across and squeezed my hand. Mark, you're a good son. Don't let Ethan get to you. You'll find your way. Her words stayed with me, but they didn't ease the anger burning in my chest. If Ethan thought he could take everything from me, he was about to learn a hard lesson. I didn't confront Ethan right away. Instead, I played the long game. I needed to make sure that when I struck, it would be devastating. I started by reaching out to an old friend, Sarah, who worked in forensic accounting. She'd always been a whiz with numbers, and I knew she could help me uncover the truth about Ethan's finances. Mark, this is risky, she said when I explained the situation. If Ethan finds out what you're doing, he could make your life even harder. I nodded. I know. But I can't let him get away with this. He's not just hurting me, he's hurting Mom too. Sarah agreed to help, and within days, she'd uncovered something shocking. Mark, Ethan's been funneling money out of the family business for years. He's been using offshore accounts, shell companies, the works. And it's not just Dad's money, he's been embezzling from the business too. I felt a mix of anger and satisfaction. This was bigger than I thought. Ethan wasn't just greedy, he was a criminal. I thanked Sarah and got to work. I needed to gather as much evidence as possible. Emails, bank statements, internal documents, anything that could prove what he was doing. But I didn't act yet. I wanted to see how far he'd go. Ethan, meanwhile, was getting bolder. He started posting on social media about his unstoppable rise, tagging investors and celebrities in every post. So grateful for my amazing team. Together, we're changing the world. The comments were full of praise. Visionary. The next Steve Jobs. I just smiled. Let them enjoy their moment. It wouldn't last long. Ethan and his team were getting sloppy. They thought they were untouchable, but their arrogance was their downfall. One night, I got a tip from a former employee who'd been fired for asking too many questions. "Mark, you need to see this. Ethan's been funneling money into offshore accounts. And his CFO? She's in on it too." I didn't waste any time. I started compiling everything into a single file. Emails, financial records, photos, videos, it was all there. A roadmap of their betrayal. But I didn't act yet. I wanted to see how far they'd go. Ethan, meanwhile, was living his best life. He'd just announced a groundbreaking new project, a luxury resort on the coast. He'd even convinced a group of investors to pour millions into the venture. "This is going to be the crown jewel of my empire," he boasted during a press conference. "A place where dreams come true." I watched the live stream, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The evidence was ready. All I had to do was hit send. But I waited. A few days later, Ethan hosted a lavish party to celebrate the resort's groundbreaking. He invited everyone, investors, celebrities, even some of our old family friends. I wasn't on the guest list, of course. But that didn't stop me from showing up. I arrived just as the party was in full swing. Ethan was holding court in the center of the room, a glass of champagne in one hand and a smug smile on his face. "Mark," he said when he saw me. "What are you doing here?" I smiled. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Then I handed the event coordinator a USB drive and whispered, "Play this." The room went silent as the screen behind Ethan lit up. Emails, financial records, photos, everything I'd collected over the past few weeks. The crowd gasped. Ethan froze, his face pale. His CFO tried to rush the stage, but security stopped her. "What is this?" someone shouted. I stepped forward, microphone in hand. "This is the truth. Ethan has been lying to all of you. His empire is built on fraud." The room erupted. People were shouting, phones were out, recording everything. Ethan tried to speak, but no one was listening. He was screaming at me, tears streaming down his face. "Mark, how could you do this to me?" I just looked at him. "You did this to yourself." The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. News outlets, social media, even industry blogs were covering the scandal. Ethan exposed fraud, embezzlement, and lies. Investors demand answers. Ethan and his team tried to spin the narrative, but it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming. Investors started pulling out, one after another. The resort project was cancelled, and Ethan's company's stock plummeted. He was forced to step down as CEO, and his CFO was arrested within days, facing charges of fraud and embezzlement. Ethan, meanwhile, was in full damage control mode. He posted a tearful video on LinkedIn, claiming he'd been misled by his team. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I was just trying to build something great." The comments were brutal. "You're a liar. You deserve everything that's coming to you." I didn't say a word. I just watched as his life unraveled. But the best part? The money. Thanks to Sarah's help, I was able to recover most of the stolen funds. The investors even offered me a settlement to keep quiet about the details. I didn't take it. Instead, I used the evidence to start my own company, a legitimate one this time. By the end of the month, Ethan was gone. He moved back in with his parents, his reputation in ruins. As for me, I was just getting started. Ethan thought the worst was over. He was wrong. I spent the next few weeks quietly building my case. I knew he'd try to rebuild his life, and I wasn't about to let that happen. First, I reached out to some of Ethan's former employees. They'd been silent out of fear, but now that the truth was out, they were eager to talk. One of them, a young accountant named Mia, had been fired for questioning Ethan's ethics. When I showed her the evidence, she was furious. He ruined my career, Mark. He told everyone I was incompetent, and I couldn't find another job because of him. I handed her a folder. Here's everything you need to clear your name. Mia didn't waste any time. She went public with her story, and the media ate it up. Former employee exposes Ethan's toxic behavior. Ethan tried to defend himself, but no one was listening. His reputation was beyond repair. Next, I turned my attention to his investors. They'd lost millions, and they were looking for someone to blame. I sent them a detailed report, outlining every lie, every fraudulent transaction, every shady deal Ethan had made. The response was immediate. Lawsuits were filed, and Ethan was facing criminal charges. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Ethan's parents had always adored him, but even they couldn't ignore the truth. When they found out what he'd done, they were furious. His father called me one evening, his voice cold and steady. "Mark, I want to thank you for exposing this. We've decided to cut Ethan off completely. He needs to face the consequences of his actions." I didn't say much, just thanked him and hung up. The next day, the news broke. Disgraced CEO Ethan cut off by family. Ethan was arrested within hours. The charges were serious: fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. He was looking at years in prison. He tried to reach out to me one last time. "Mark, please. I'll do anything. Just help me." I didn't respond. I'd already moved on. A year later, my life looked nothing like it had before. Ethan was serving a 5-year sentence, and his once glamorous life was in ruins. His parents had cut him off completely, and his former friends wanted nothing to do with him. As for me, I'd rebuilt my life from the ground up. I started my own company, a small but successful tech firm that specialized in ethical business solutions. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to succeed. And I did. Within months, I had a growing list of clients and a reputation for honesty and integrity. I also reconnected with old friends, the ones who'd stood by me when everything fell apart. Mia, the accountant Ethan had fired, joined my team. Together, we built something incredible. But the best part? I found love again. Her name was Emma. She was a journalist I met at a tech conference. We hit it off immediately, bonding over our shared love of innovation and bad puns. She didn't know about my past, and when I finally told her, she didn't flinch. "Mark, you're not defined by what happened to you. You're defined by how you moved forward." Those words stayed with me. One evening, as we sat on my balcony watching the sunset, Emma turned to me. "Do you ever think about Ethan?" I shook my head. "Not really. He's part of my past, not my future." Emma smiled. "Good. Because your future looks pretty amazing." She was right. A few months after Ethan was behind bars, I was finally able to realize my dream. With the $10,000 my father left me as an inheritance, I opened a small cafe. Not the one I had originally dreamed of, but something bigger. I called it Second Chance. It was a place where people could not only have a coffee, but also find support. We held free workshops for those who lost their jobs, helped homeless people find temporary housing, and local artists exhibited their work here. My mom became the main inspiration behind the project. She came every morning, baked her signature pies and handed them out to visitors. Her smile finally became genuine. One morning, while we were arranging fresh flowers on the tables, Mom took my hand. "You know Dad would be proud of you right now." I mumbled. I wanted to believe it was true, but I didn't need his approval anymore. Dozens of people showed up for the cafe opening. Friends, customers from my company, even journalists. Emma was writing an article about it, and I stood at the entrance, looking at the sign, wondering how far I'd come. Ethan? He'd become a ghost from the past. His name had been in the news occasionally, the trial, the appeals, the attempts to settle with investors. But it didn't matter anymore. I stream every day on 4 channels. This morning I woke up to a ringing phone. An unfamiliar number was glowing on the screen. "Mark, it's Ethan." His voice shook. I remained silent. "I have 6 months left. Prison, it's hell. I want to apologize." I looked out the window. The sun was shining outside, Emma was feeding the pigeons on the balcony, and people were crowding downstairs, outside the cafe. Apologizing isn't going to change anything anymore, Ethan, I said calmly. But thank you. You've made me stronger. He tried to say something, but I hung up. That evening, Emma and I sat on the roof of the cafe, drinking wine and laughing about her new report. She was writing about how small stories change the world. You know what the funniest part is? She smiled. You didn't even get revenge. You were just living. And that was enough to make everything fall apart. I hugged her and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there was Ethan, in his cage. And here was me, free. Sometimes the best revenge is silence, where you can hear other people's castles crumbling.